Today we have Maleda Gebremedhin here with the Womb of Life School. And Maleda has had many past lives in Ireland, or several past lives in Ireland. And Maleda is really deep into past life healing and past life work. And I will let her tell you a little bit more about her work. But I'm really happy to have you, Maleda, and I think this is going to be a really juicy conversation.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm absolutely overjoyed to be with you and to share from my experience with you.
Beautiful. Yeah. So last week, I forget how it came up, but we were just talking about Ireland. I think I didn't even mention to you this summit yet, and it came up, and we were talking about your connection to the land and how you've run retreats there, and your past lives there. So can you give us some background? I guess first start with your background about your work, and then we can dive into your connection to the Celts in Ireland.
Yes, okay. Well, I'd like to just share a little bit about what the work is and how it evolved, because I think that'll give a lot of context for our conversation. So I'll talk about my personal journey first, and how my personal journey led to the work that I'm offering, the healing work and feminine realization work that I'm offering today. And so my journey began about 20 years ago. My spiritual journey began about 20 years ago, although it's, of course, culminated for lifetimes, as it has for many of us. But my intentional work with it on this lifetime began at a time when I was experiencing a lot of trauma and suffering in my life. And it had to do with feminine trauma, and I had known it for many years. I was about 27, about 27 when this movement started for me. And I knew at some point I was going to start what I called before that my work. And I didn't know what that was, but I knew it had something to do with spiritual work and something to do with serving humanity as a whole. And that first led me into following my deep, deep love for Mother Earth and Mother Nature into a more scholastic setting, but in a Buddhist university. And through that, I began to reconnect with that deeply meaningful, conscious relationship with Mother Earth, which of course opened up many, many things for me. And then from that place, I realized, and I was doing a lot of activism at the time, and at a certain point it clicked in that I would only be able to serve the world to the extent that I have healed myself. It became very apparent through my activism work that there was a place where a lot of us as activists were acting from a place of frustration, of anger, of disconnection, and that wasn't effective. It just simply wasn't effective, and it was actually feeding energy into the field that we were trying to heal ultimately. And so I kind of stepped back from all of that and began to embark upon my feminine healing journey. And it first began with yoga. And through that practice, I began to come more back into my body, began to understand my feminine anatomy, because I was studying with a teacher who specialized in women's yoga and helping us to open our bodies and our energy fields to our natural design and become healthy in that once again. So I was really deep and very intentional into that for several years, and also a form of sacred dance that brought that forward as well. And it was at that time that I began to first connect with my womb. And that's what she guided us through, was opening our awareness and our breath into our womb and reopening that connection from our womb with Mother Earth. And so I began to start experiencing a lot of changes inside of myself through that really, really intense practice over several years, which was really, the intense practice continued for many years, but the studying with this particular teacher really, really changed my entire relationship to my feminine body and being at a fundamental level, and prepared me for the deeper spiritual work that I would then embark upon. And so after several years of that, I was called to take it a level deeper and began to do spiritual work with a spiritual teacher. And during that time, I was integrating everything that I had learned in the women's work with my yoga teacher with the more traditional, Eastern traditional monastic ashram community that I just dove, body, mind, and soul into and lived in for 10 years. And so in staying with the yoga and the dance and even teaching women's work during that time, it began to open for me a deeper, ever deeper spiritual connection with Mother Earth, because the ashram was in a place, really beautiful sacred land in Colorado. And I would continue to open that connection in my walks, and that's where my greatest realization would come from. And meanwhile, I was teaching the women's work, and that's what actually brought me to Ireland first.
I didn't know that about you.
Yes, I was invited to teach there, and I was teaching women's programs there, women's healing and women's awakening. And so, and the first moment that I stepped off of the plane in Ireland, I felt it. And I really didn't feel any I only went there because I was invited. Like, before I went there, I didn't feel a connection necessarily. It never even crossed my awareness. But it was so palpable. The moment that I got off the plane, the energy in the land there is so incredibly alive. The goddess energy, the mother energy, the feminine energy is so tangible, like almost more than many other places that I've been on the planet. And I felt it. I just felt her, the goddess of Yer, the goddess of Ire there, just like came over me as soon as I came off the plane. And it was an immediate feeling of falling in love and feeling at home, and incredibly profoundly nourished, ineffably nourished by the land there. And so then that's how it all opened up for me. And I went back several times to teach, and I was teaching women how, things that I learned about opening your body and your energy field, and also then the greater omnipresent divine feminine nature of Mother Earth, of Mother Nature, and all of life. And then also in conjunction with that, doing deep healing work in one-on-one sessions with women, and helping them to heal traumas and things that they'd experienced in this lifetime, things that they'd experienced in utero. And it even at the time was starting to go into past life healing, although that didn't really fully blossom until later. And it was in that process that I really began to feel the heart and the soul of the people there. And that was also a love affair for me. It was a complete love affair. I have a great affinity for the people of Ireland. And I didn't understand why at the time. I hadn't recollected my own previous incarnations. I was just going with this overwhelming feeling of incredible love for the land and for the people. And the more I went and the more I stayed, the deeper that grew, and the deeper meaning and it had for me, and how much I cherished my relationship with that place. And it was through that time that I really began to feel the soul of the people there, and the collective suffering, which each country, each area of the world, we have our own personal healing we have to do, but then there's also collective healing on the soul of the culture. Wherever that happens to be. And it changes depending on where you are in the world, what the collective has suffered. And so I began to feel that, as I was working with women one-on-one, the sort of, main threads of suffering that were coming through in a lot of the women. And a lot of it had to do with feminine trauma. A lot of it was spiritual trauma having to do with the church. And then the other main thread that came very strongly was trauma and ancestral trauma around the famine. And so that was my love affair then. And then I ended up leaving the organization I was with. And so that chapter came to a close for a while. And I continued on my own deep spiritual journey, and that's when things really began to change for me in my life. And that's when my realization fully took hold, when I left the traditions, the confines of tradition, and I went in and found and discovered my own deepest truth from my own soul and the divine nature that lives within myself and everyone in all of life. And it was through that process, when I was on deep retreat, that I began to recall my past lives. That it was just going through this state of deep inquiry and listening and trusting and asking what needed to be healed, that it went through childhood, went in utero, and then ultimately went into past lives. And they started coming one by one, and still until today have been coming one by one to be healed, and sometimes multiple. Now at this point, there's multiple threads running, and then also ones that come back that are key ones, so it's a constant evolution. And the more these lifetimes are healed, the more we heal our ancestry, and the more we heal our personal feeling from this lifetime, which has its roots in our ancestry, has its roots in our experience from previous lifetimes. That through that process, it's how we realize ourselves. It's how we realize ourselves as soul and at one with the universe. By healing those traumas, we heal the places where we have felt separate spiritually, emotionally, physically, energetically, with all of life, with Mother Nature, with Mother Gaia, and with the Great Mother herself. So that's the path that I'm on, and that's the path that I'm speaking from. That's the perspective that I'm speaking from when I share about Ireland. So I'm not of Irish descent in this lifetime. But what I'm drawing from is the deeper wisdom from previous lifetimes, and from working with women there and being there in this lifetime, just intuitively feeling it in this lifetime. So that's the perspective I'm coming from in my sharing.
Beautiful. I love hearing your story and your perspective, and I'm curious to dive more deeply into specifically the healings and the issues that Irish women that you have worked with have brought forward. Like what are the most common ones? And also interested to dive more deeply into this past life and ancestral healing piece. Because I think what's really unique about your ancestral healing perspective is that it includes the healing of the past lives and healing of the ancestry in the past lives, which is like so. There's so many fractals of it if you think of it that way, and so we can have such a huge impact on the healings that take place when we take ownership of that, and we take responsibility for that.
Yeah, and I'd love to speak to that fractal part for a moment, because that's a great word. I've never used that word to describe it before. So when we look at a fractal, it's sort of like a kaleidoscope, right? It just spreads out. Yeah, so I absolutely love that analogy of the kaleidoscope. I've never felt it that way before, but when you look at a kaleidoscope, it kind of goes out, it blossoms out, and then it comes back in and blossoms out and comes back in like this. It's this kind of a movement of blossoming and then kind of contracting back into itself, blossoming. And this is completely how I experience the process of realization, of realizing ourselves as soul and realizing the vastness of omnipresence that we are. And it's this process where we realize ourselves like this, and that's the blossoming out, all at one with all of life, with Mother Nature, with Mother Earth, right? And then we come back in and we get contracted back into our human nature because there's something there that needs to be healed. And then as we heal that layer, again, we go out into the blossoming, and it comes out to an even more further level, and it comes out to a more further level, or a deeper level, or however, whatever level that blossoming unfolds to. Because the place that we've healed, whether it's in childhood, in utero, or in a past life, that place that we've healed has been reclaimed now in our consciousness. It's reclaimed back into the whole. So it was always there somewhere inside of us, but just deeply unconscious. And because of trauma that we experienced, we've blocked it out, we've forgotten, and that now we're in that process as a whole, as a collective of humanity, of beginning to gather back the pieces back in. And many people are going through that process at different levels. But as you go into the deeper levels, the deepest levels, when you start reclaiming your past lives, when you start reclaiming your experience of being in utero, that's when the fractals start opening and you start realizing all of these different aspects of your being, of what some people call your multidimensional being, which can feel very conceptual. But when you feel your being and even your body as a fractal like that, and you start healing that piece, and then that piece leads to another blossoming open over here, and that one leads to another blossoming, and you're just, it's like all of these different levels and layers and petals of your being begin to naturally unfold and express themselves because they've been stuck in that place. They've been lost in that place. And when we bring it back into the whole through the healing process, we now have that in addition to everything else that we have, which encompasses major gifts, wisdom, connection, spiritual development that we've had in past lifetimes, spiritual development that our ancestors have grown and passed on to us. We can reclaim that as well. We don't just want to release their pain, we want to reclaim the gifts, right? And so all of that feeds into this massive fractal being that we are. And it's an amazing, magnificent process. Magnificent process.
I feel so excited and lit up as we're talking about this content. And the thing that I want to highlight, I think, is this perspective that you're bringing, that the healing that you do in your work is really in service. It's not just healing for the sake of healing, which often in just the media and how things are presented, often it seems like healing is just for the sake of healing to me. That's kind of how it comes across. But what's unique about what you're saying is that healing is really in service of realization, and it's in service of knowing your entire soul and all of the wisdom that you've collected over your soul's entire, I want to say lifetime, but just your soul time. And
your soul has a cycle of lifetimes that can feel, once you start really going deeply into it, it feels like one lifetime throughout in all of these different places, bodies, cultures, but time collapses and you start to feel the thread of continuity through it all. And it is ultimately the experience I'm having in now is one field of lifetimes. It's not like separate things that have happened because they're all connected into each other and they all feed into each other. And as you heal one, those aspects are also healed in the other. It's like a wheel.
Right. Time. Yeah, it occurs like different chapters of your soul time. And I've heard some people talk about I guess it would be the Akashic Records and just this place where you can go and really get a download of information from all of the people that you have been before, or the beings that you have been before. And so I get excited imagining how much human potential is available when we have access to that place.
Absolutely massive. Absolutely. Because with each trauma that we've experienced in these lifetimes and in this lifetime, what happens also is that there isn't just the emotional trauma, it's a part of our being gets shut down. That's how we get blocks in our energy field, leads to disease and all kinds of ways. And this specifically, we'll come back to the Irish piece in a moment because I feel this resonance with Ireland, where, because there is such, and all of us have histories of lifetimes where we've been deeply connected to Mother Earth, deeply and profoundly connected to Mother Earth in ways that we can't even possibly imagine right now. And those ways take place in gateways in our body, and women, especially through what I call our cervical gateway, which is the gateway, the energetic field of our cervix, which connects us into Mother Earth. And there's also other major gateways, of course, in our womb, which connects us then into the womb of Mother Earth, but also into what I call the source womb of life, which is the womb at the center of the universe. And so we have these organic, natural connections to all of life, gateways in our body. And when we experience trauma, these gateways get blocked, they get severed, they get shut down. And so when you heal, if you're doing that kind of healing work, evolutionary healing work, deep soul healing work, you're not only healing the emotional trauma, you're reopening these gateways that were shut down. And so you're reopening your organic body and energy field connection to Mother Earth and to all of life, to the cosmos, to every aspect of life that there is, to the collective whole of humanity. And through doing that, you begin to enter into omnipresence, the state of omnipresence, the state of divine realization. Mm. And so this is so, so, so important to recognize as integral to the path of realization, because it's embodied realization, and it's not just something you go and you experience this transcendent moment. This is what you get to then live in your body in. And what I call remember our divine design, our actual organic design in our body, in our energy field, as deeply and profoundly connected to Mother Earth and all of life in the universe. And it's an entirely different experience of life. Entirely different experience of life. And so when I began to remember my lifetimes, this is what began to happen. And I was just shown how to heal them, one after the other. And I'm continuously shown that up until today. And in that process, I remembered several lifetimes in Ireland so far, several that I've had in Ireland. And through the deep healing work that I did on myself, through that, I remember the profoundly mystical connection that I had with Mother Earth in these lifetimes, profoundly, unfathomably, in a place where I was absolutely in love, which I experience now in my life as well. But because life in those times, hold on, I think I just froze just 1 second.
Okay.
Can you see me?
Yeah, you're not frozen for me. I can see you. You're moving.
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So, and so life in these times that I lived for my personal being, I'm not saying it was necessarily true for the collective still at that time. Two of the lifetimes it was, but in the third lifetime it was getting less and less present for that connection with Mother Earth. But it's not just a felt connection in those times, it was lived. We just lived closer to the earth. We farmed, we interacted with Mother Nature at a far, far greater extent than we do today. Far, far greater extent, a completely different existence. Like even when you read old, stories or even myths and legends, I was just reading about St. Patrick, getting ready for this interview. And even in his descriptions, everything he describes, he's what was done is he was on the mountain, or he had to cross the river, or, he was in this place in nature. Mm-hmm. You don't hear that today, really. Even in a lot of spiritual work, unless that spiritual work is specifically centered around Mother Nature, you're not hearing, well, I was on the mountain. I was talking to the river, or I was, so it was just Mother Nature for us in those times was just all we couldn't escape her in the way we do now. And I think that we've gotten so cloistered in these days in our buildings, in our air conditioning, in our protection from Mother Nature, that we've lost a massive, massive gift of life, a massive, massive way of communion with all that is. And that happened through, all of the processes over the past 2,000 years of different kinds of religious domination and suppression. Mm-hmm. So in those Irish lifetimes, that's what I lived in. That's what I experienced, complete and utter connection with Mother Nature. And then in the third lifetime of that, it was in a period when that was not really accepted so much anymore. And so I had to keep it to myself. And that feeling of like having to hide my deep love and mystical relationship and my ecstasy of being with Mother Nature was what needed to be healed in this lifetime. The feeling that, you know, it wasn't okay to just express that out in the open. And I feel that that is a piece that has come up also with many of the beautiful Irish women that I've worked with, is that particular thread of feeling like it's not safe or it's not okay or accepted to express your spiritual truth, which of course is a natural result of spiritual persecution and suppression. Mm-hmm. And so that's a major thread that I feel in the collective field there that has affected because I feel that Irish souls who are born into Ireland, inherently, because of the mystical nature of the island itself, have that mystical tone to them, even if it's suppressed, even if it's hidden, even if it's down underneath.
Yeah, even
that those that have that deep love.
Yeah.
Can you say that again? You just froze.
I
Please.
said even in the way that they speak and like the poetry and they speak in like a very melodic, poetic way.
Yes. True. And the song, you know, like my experience was that many of these beautiful women would just sing, just break out into song in this most mystical and beautiful and delightful way that just brings that energy forward, that celebration of life and understanding of the beauty of just the simplicity of being. And I feel like that's what I really want to express what I feel is really unique about that was my experience of the Irish people in this lifetime and visiting there in this lifetime, was this incredibly beautiful simplicity of being. And it's so hard to describe in words, but my sense of it is, my felt sense of it is, this wasn't something anyone said to me, but just my intuitive sense of it is that comes from not so far back, you know, their ancestors being farmers and deeply, deeply connected to the land in that way, because they lived and breathed and ate with the land like 24/7. Even if it wasn't a mystical connection, it was a lived connection with their hands and their body and their sweat, and, you know, they're digging in the dirt and needing to rely on Mother Nature for life not so long ago. And somehow the land, the vibrancy of the land there in Ireland has been kept alive even through all of the persecution and everything that has happened there and the suppression. Somehow the sacred sites have been kept very, very vibrantly alive and palpable with spiritual energy. And it's remarkable. It's quite remarkable. And I feel like that nourishes and feeds the people as well, even when they're not aware of it. You know, often we're not aware of how our environment is affecting us for better or for worse. In Ireland's case, I feel that the nature there, the island itself, she's so alive, even though she's been so farmed and so, you know, persecuted and all of that. She has maintained her life force energy, and that is feeding the people at a very deep mystical level, and is absolutely gorgeous. It's so beautiful to interact with people who that way of simplicity, internal simplicity.
Yeah, I as you're speaking about this, I'm remembering I was in Half Moon Bay with my parents a few years ago, and it's really beautiful there. There's like cliffs and rolling hills, and it's kind of looks like Ireland. And one day at the place we were staying, a man in a kilt was playing the bagpipes just overlooking the sea and on a cliff. And I was like uncontrollably just weeping. And it was, wow. I couldn't explain why. And I'm just remembering that. And it's not necessarily like Irish only. It's more of like a Celtic or Scottish tradition, but
well, I remember the very first night I slept in Ireland, I was in a dear soul's house, and in the morning, first thing in the morning, I guess there was a church or something across the street, and someone played the bagpipes outside, very like at dawn, and it was my first night ever in Ireland, and I was just exploding in ecstasy and love because I just felt like I was being greeted. I was being greeted by the soul of Ireland, by the Irish people, and by the land there, and it was such an incredibly beautiful, welcoming moment.
Yeah, the bagpipes are so, they just evoke a lot of emotion. I think for a lot of people, it's such a traditional instrument, and I think they evoke a lot of subconscious memories for people, and with that emotion.
Yeah. All sound will. And I think that sound is really important also to the Irish culture, the traditional songs and, which are very vibrant even still today, and the stories and the myths and, the myths about the land and the sacred sites, all of that just feels so vibrant still to a greater extent. Maybe it's not fully the way it was, but to a much greater extent than, for instance, here in the United States, we don't have that at all. And so it's very remarkable when you go into a culture when that is alive, their actual relationship to their history is alive.
And the language as well. They still teach the language, the Gaelic language, in schools.
Yes. Yeah. So I wanted to share also about the piece about the sacred sites there that I've experienced. And that is because the land is so alive, but that, we talk about religious persecution and all of that. And I shared this with you before, but I feel this is something I really recognized while I was there, is that in quite a few of the sacred sites, like a lot of the wells, the sacred wells that are now, of the church.
Right.
But somehow that worked to keep the land alive, but at least they weren't like totally torn up or a building was put over them or anything, they were kept sacred, even though in a different tradition.
Right. But it's almost like encoded in a way. It's like a secret.
Yeah, I feel like that has really served the land as a whole to keep the Irish goddess alive. That she was able, these really potent sacred sites, which are very powerful there, were a lot of them, not all of them, of course, but a lot of them were kept, in the church, on church grounds or on, sacred grounds like that. So that because they act just like chakras in our body, sacred sites act like chakras into Mother Earth. They are chakras. They don't even act like, but they are chakras. And so by keeping those in a way cared for, that it has made a huge difference in the energy of the land staying palpably alive like that. And so there is something that was able to happen there through that I've only seen in other places, in some places in South America. It's the same way, where there was this merging of the earth-based spiritualities with the church, and that was allowed to happen, to a certain extent, that it served, that it wasn't, the earth-based religions weren't totally wiped out.
Yeah. And in contrast, in my research, I was reading about how there was no religion and the state were together, right? There was no secular politics there. And that's partly why people left Europe. And when they came to the States, it's separation of church and state. And meanwhile, we have all these beautiful national parks, national monuments, and sacred sites that are considered sacred by some people, but then and now they're in danger. And so it's like this contrast between the secular and the not secular.
Yeah, it is. And it's, I'm only speaking from this perspective in this moment, that something was able to stay alive in the land through that merging, not merging of the state and the church, merging of the earth-based religions with the Christian religions that came in. And then that was able to create something that was workable,
something that preserves that life.
What happened here, where it was completely wiped out. the earth base, they were just wiped out. There was no acceptance of any aspect of them at all.
Right.
You know, and how that affected our relationship to the land here
Mm-hmm.
in the United States. And I think that's something remarkable to really pay attention to. And it's a real gift, I feel, that is very present there in Ireland.
I love that. And I'm wanting to connect back to the how to access those past lives through the primordial womb, and sort of wrap up this conversation in a bow with your offering. So can you talk some more about how one would access the primordial womb and the place where the soul's information is lives?
Yes. Yeah. So that's a fantastic question. Thank you for asking that. And here is where this work really has a special offering, a unique offering to give to life. Because I think so often in modern day spirituality, we talk about the soul as something conceptual, or the soul as simply a feeling we have inside, you know, or a yearning or a longing or something like that, you know. But what I think a lot of people don't realize or have yet to experience in this lifetime, that the soul, our soul, is actually a presence. Our soul is actually even a substance of light and energy. It's almost a tangible substance. And when you look at things on the level of energy, our soul is an entity. It is a level. It has a substance. It has a substance of light and energy and sound and vibration, and it's very tangible if you have your eyes open and your feeling sense open to energy. And so when we talk about the soul in this work, we're talking about that, the actual most core substance of who we are, the core presence of who we are that carries over from lifetime to lifetime to lifetime, is always ever present and is still lit and is multidimensional, lives on many different dimensions at once, like that kaleidoscope. But the soul is the thing at the core of all of it. And so this work, and that's in this field, that's what we do, is we travel in, and where that soul presence sits or is rooted into our physical form in women is in our wombs, specifically in our cervical gateway. And that's true whether you have your physical uterus still or not, because many women have had their uterus removed. The field and the presence of our womb is always, always there, even if the uterus has been removed. And so that's where our soul, when we're healthy, when the soul has come back into the body, that's where she roots, is especially in the cervix, in the cervical gateway. Mm. And because of all the trauma that women have experienced for eons, that has been severed, and our soul has been split off in all of these different traumas and all of these different dimensions. And even from our body, a lot of the time, our soul is floating like back behind us or high above us. And so we have this general feeling of disconnect, like something's off, something's wrong. We don't know who we are or why we're here, or we're searching for ourselves. You know that phrase, like, I'm searching for myself. Literally, that's because who we are is not in our body. She's floating up here, or floating like back behind our womb.
We're disembodied,
yeah, mm-hmm. And connected by very thin threads. And so what this field specializes in is to bring the soul back into the womb, into the body, to claim our body temple in this lifetime and in all lifetimes for our own. And then naturally we begin to land in self. We know our meaning, our purpose. We know why we're here. And we understand what it is to live in deep connection with all that is. So that all happens from the soul presence that is anchored in our cervical gateway, and which is healed by healing these traumas of this and past lifetimes. And to get to that healing, then what we do is we journey down into the energy field of our wombs. And then where our soul is still very much alive in different realms of the womb of life, in the oceanic womb of Mother Earth, and in what I call the primordial womb, which is the eternal soul state, where our soul is always at rest, and is even right now, even while we're in our body, that aspect of our soul is always there. So the soul has different layers to it. that aspect of our eternal soul is always there. So we can travel to that part of our soul through our wombs. And I'll share for a moment about how we can do that. Because the soul, when we first incarnate into a woman's womb, into our mother's womb, when we first enter into incarnation, what happens then is our soul, that eternal aspect of our soul, comes in through the portal in our mother's womb and incarnates in the physical cells of the zygote. So it comes in there. And some women who are very conscious, they even experience a light flashing when that happens. They know, they can feel it happening when it happens, the moment of conception. And that's when that eternal soul presence is coming in and lighting up the matter. And then the soul then blossoms into the physical body and all of that, right? And so that portal is there in every woman's womb. That's the function that the womb plays, is a portal between physical matter and the realm of soul, spirit, the mystery. And that's literally what happens when every child is born. And so every woman has this capacity to travel in consciousness through her own womb, back through that portal in her own womb, where all souls are eternally at rest, but then find her own eternal soul in that place and land and realize her own eternal soul. And that's how we begin to realize ourselves as immortal beings, eternal and immortal beings. And when we enter into our soul there, in that place is our soul, everything our soul has ever lived, in every realm, in every dimension, in every lifetime here on earth. And so we journey into that place of our eternal soul, and we ask our soul to show us the lifetime that needs to be healed. And from there, the soul will bring us into the lifetime, and then we go through the healing processes, and we reclaim and we bring home the trauma. We bring home that part of our soul that was shattered off, and we bring that part home unto our eternal soul, and then the blossoming happens again, and the gifts come alive, and the wisdom we lived come alive, that sense of oneness that perhaps we lived in lifetimes far back as indigenous people, as Celtic people, as there's this inherent knowingness and connection with nature that blossoms open, and we're able to clear then also the gateways in our physical body that were blocked off from traumas as well. So it happens on every level, physical, emotional, spiritual, and then we just continue to reclaim and blossom and reclaim and blossom and reclaim and blossom. And it's an ever expanding process of realization until we realize ourselves as the great mother herself, the omnipresent mother in all that is. So that's the process. And it's an absolutely sacred, magnificent, and glorious process of self-realization that will give life beyond what you can possibly imagine before you embark upon the journey.
Yeah, every time I talk to you, you're like, everything is so amazing. And I have a story that it's because of this work that your life is just I have a story that your life is like full of messages and synchronicities and magic, and
that's not the story, that's the reality I live in.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually, you're right on, that's the reality I live in, and it is because of this work.
Mm-hmm.
But there are very challenging moments, I'm not going to lie about that. When we go through these, when the things arise to be healed, it's very painful. Yeah. And we have to meet that healing and meet that suffering and embrace it and feel it to bring it back into the whole and to reclaim it. So those moments are very challenging for everybody. That's universal, But what I can say is once you embark upon this journey and you begin to heal those more and more and more, it gets easier. You're able to sit in the suffering with more power and more presence, and therefore more ease. And then ultimately, if you're a healer or a guide, or if you feel like you want to develop the ability to help other souls that way, it grows exponentially, because the more you heal yourself in the deepest level possible, which is what this field offers, then the more you have that same knowledge and wisdom and power and presence more than anything, and compassion to help other souls to heal.
Yeah, I love it. I love it. It's so inspiring the way you speak to it, and so eloquent and articulate. Like it's so logical, which I love.
Yes.
And so, how can women connect with you? What is your? I know
On
that you
my
have a free mini.
website, which is I do. I have an introduction, a very simple introduction to get your feet wet sort of in this field. And so you can visit me at wombmatrixhealing.com. That's wombmatrixhealing.com. And right there on the home page is a free mini course, Awaken to Primordial Womb Healing. And you're most welcome and invited to go there and to sign up and receive that introduction immediately. And then, of course, you'll be on my email list and you'll receive those many upcoming courses. And I'm even getting ready to offer a 7-month course in past life healing. So, if you're interested in exploring that inside of yourself, it's a great opportunity to do that. So you can visit me there. And I would absolutely love for you to join us.
Beautiful. Thank you, Maleda.
Thank you so much. It's my great honor and joy to share the absolute magnificent beauty of this field and this precious moment of life with you.